On an ordinary Tuesday evening outside his own home, a single father of two was ordered to the ground handcuffed and taken away in front of his children. The officer never asked for ID, never stated a clear charge. The whole thing lasted under 4 minutes. What no one on that street knew, what the officer himself did not know, was that within 12 hours federal agents would flood the same police station, seize every body camera, and walk the arresting officer out in cuffs of his own. This is the story of how one stop outside a black man's home triggered a federal investigation that no one saw coming. Marcus Hale worked the late shift at the distribution center and came home just as the sun dropped behind the trees. His two children waited at the window the way they always did. He stepped onto the porch, keys in hand, ready to walk inside when the lights hit him. A patrol car blocked the driveway, and a white officer stepped out, hand already near his holster. Marcus asked what was wrong. The officer told him to turn around and put his hands behind his back. No warrant was shown. No explanation was given beyond the claim that he looked suspicious standing on his own property. The children watched from the glass as their father was pressed against the railing, cuffed, and placed in the back of the car. Neighbors later said the entire scene lasted less than 4 minutes. Before we go further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you, and do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Marcus had no criminal record. He paid the mortgage on time, coached the local youth basketball team, and kept the yard neat. The neighborhood knew him as the quiet man who worked overtime so his kids could stay in the same school. That night he was booked for disorderly conduct and resisting. The charge sheet listed no specific act of resistance beyond asking why he was being arrested. He sat in a holding cell for 6 hours before they released him with a citation and a bruised wrist. His children asked the next morning why the police had taken their father away. He told them the truth as gently as he could, and then began the long process of filing a formal complaint. The local department opened an internal review that moved slowly. Statements were taken, and the body camera files were logged. Marcus returned to work and tried to keep life steady for his kids. He did not know that the same camera footage had already left the station on a quiet transfer. An anonymous package had reached a federal civil rights unit days earlier containing a pattern of earlier stops by the same officer. The new recording from Marcus's porch became the cleanest piece of evidence they had. Investigators compared timestamps, previous complaints, and the officer's own reports. What they found was a repeated practice of stopping black men in residential areas with little or no stated cause. 12 hours after Marcus was released, unmarked vehicles pulled up to the police station before the morning shift change. Federal agents entered the building with a warrant limited to specific devices and files. They collected every body camera hard drive from the previous week along with the original arrest report and the officer's duty log. By midday, the same officer who had cuffed Marcus on his porch was escorted from the building in handcuffs of his own. The charge was deprivation of rights under color of law. The local department placed him on unpaid leave while the federal case moved forward. Marcus learned the news while waiting in the school pickup line. He sat in the truck for a long minute watching his children walk toward him before he allowed himself to feel the weight lift. The charges against him were dropped the following week. The federal case against the officer continued through the summer and into the fall. Court documents later showed a history of similar stops that had been closed without discipline. Neighbors who had watched the original arrest spoke to reporters for the first time. The story that began on a quiet porch ended with the man who made the arrest facing the same system he had used against others. Marcus kept working the same job and raising his children the same way. He still coaches the youth team and still comes home at dusk. The porch light stays on until both kids are inside. He has said little in public beyond the statement that a father should be able to walk through his own front door without fear. The federal agents who entered the station that morning did not come because of one complaint alone. They came because the evidence from that 4-minute stop was too clear to ignore, and because the pattern it revealed had already been waiting for a final piece. The single father who simply wanted to unlock his door became the reason the station doors opened to a different kind of authority. Who was the man really standing on that porch with his keys in his hand, while his two children watched from the window? Why did a routine neighborhood patrol turn into an arrest on private property, with no clear charge and no request for identification? And what secret was sitting inside that police station that made federal agents move so fast the very next morning, seizing every body camera and walking the arresting officer out in handcuffs of his own? Stay with me because the answer changes everything you think you know about that night. Marcus Hale had come home from the late shift the way he always did, ready to step through his front door and ask his kids about their day. The street was quiet, the porch light was on, and nothing about the moment suggested trouble until the patrol car stopped and the officer stepped out. In less than 4 minutes, Marcus was face down on his own property, cuffed and driven away while his children stood at the glass. The officer never explained the stop beyond the claim that something looked wrong. Neighbors who saw the lights later said they had never seen anything like it on that block. The questions that followed the arrest would not stay quiet for long. The man taken from his porch that evening was a single father who worked overtime so his children could stay in the same school and sleep under the same roof. He kept no record that would justify the force used against him, yet the handcuffs still closed around his wrists in front of the only family he had left. What happened after the car doors shut and the station lights came on would reveal far more than one bad stop. The same building that held Marcus for 6 hours already contained files and recordings that federal investigators had been waiting to examine. The speed of their arrival the next morning was not chance. It was the result of something that had been waiting for the right moment and the right piece of evidence to surface. Marcus Hale was 41 years old, a warehouse supervisor who had raised his 2 children alone after their mother left. He lived in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of a mid-sized Midwestern city where the houses sat close enough that people still waved from their porches. He kept no criminal record of any kind. Neighbors knew him as the man who shoveled the sidewalks after every heavy snow and coached the youth basketball team at the community center on weekends. He worked overtime most nights so the mortgage stayed current and the children could remain in the same school. That Tuesday evening, he left the warehouse later than usual, drove the familiar route home, and turned onto his street just as the last light faded from the sky. He parked in the driveway the way he always did, stepped out with his keys already in hand, and looked up at the front window where his son and daughter waited. He raised one hand in the same small wave he had given them for years, then started up the short walk to the porch. The house was quiet, the porch light was on, and nothing about the moment felt different from any other night. He had come home after a long shift. Marcus Hale had no idea that a pair of headlights slowing at the end of his street would rewrite the next year of his life and end another man's career. The patrol car stopped at the end of the driveway, and the officer stepped out with one hand already near his holster. He told Marcus Hale that he looked suspicious, that he matched a description, and that he appeared to be loitering in a high-crime area, even though Marcus was standing on his own front porch with his house keys in plain view. Marcus kept his voice steady and asked what the charge was. The officer gave no clear answer and ordered him to turn around. When Marcus repeated the question, the officer moved closer, forced his hands behind his back, and locked the cuffs in place while the 2 children watched from the window. No warrant was shown. No stated probable cause existed beyond the color of his skin and the fact that he was home. Marcus was placed in the back of the car and driven to the station, where he was booked for disorderly conduct and resisting. The paperwork listed no specific act of resistance beyond the questions he had asked on his own property. He sat in a holding cell for 6 hours before they released him with a citation and a bruised wrist. The body cam footage from that night would later show something the officer never expected anyone to examine closely. Marcus Hale filed a formal complaint the next morning describing every detail of the stop on his own porch. The local department closed ranks around the officer, and the internal affairs review began at a deliberate pace that offered little hope of quick answers. Statements were collected and the body camera files were logged, yet the process moved forward without urgency. At the same time, a quiet federal civil rights tip line received an anonymous package that contained a single clear phrase captured on the body cam audio, a pattern of previous stops carried out by the same officer, and a name that already appeared in an unrelated federal file. While Marcus tried to explain to his children why their father had been taken away in handcuffs, a different set of eyes was already watching the same police station. The package did not name Marcus directly, yet the recording from his porch supplied the missing link that investigators had been waiting for. The slow local review continued as if nothing larger was underway, but the material now in federal hands would not remain quiet for long. The officer who had placed Marcus Hale in handcuffs on his own porch carried a history of excessive force and racial profiling complaints that had been buried inside the department for years. More critically, the same officer was already under quiet federal scrutiny for a separate pattern of evidence mishandling connected to a larger civil rights probe. The body cam footage from the stop outside Marcus's home became the final clean piece of evidence the investigators needed. It matched the earlier stops in method and language and supplied the clear recording that earlier files had lacked. At 6:17 the next morning, federal agents walked through the front doors of the station. They seized hard drives, body-worn cameras, and the arrest report from the night before. By noon, the officer who had cuffed Marcus Hale on his own porch was himself in custody, charged with deprivation of rights under color of law. The local department offered no public statement that morning while the federal team continued its work inside the building. The material taken from the station that day would form the core of the case that followed. Marcus Hale learned the news while dropping his children at school. He sat in the truck for a long moment, watching them walk toward the entrance before he allowed the mix of relief and residual anger to settle. The charges against him were dropped the following week. The officer was placed on unpaid suspension and later indicted on the federal count. Local media finally covered the story once the federal action became public and the original body cam recording from the porch could no longer be kept quiet. A single father who simply wanted to walk through his own front door ended up exposing a pattern that federal investigators had been chasing for months. Justice did not arrive because the system was perfect. It arrived because one man refused to stay silent, and because the evidence was too clean to bury. Marcus returned to the same warehouse shifts and the same quiet routine of raising his children. The porch lights still came on each evening, and the children still waited at the window, yet the weight of that Tuesday night no longer rested on him alone. Stories like Marcus Hale's remind us that accountability still matters and that ordinary people can force it. A single father who only wanted to unlock his own front door after a long shift became the reason federal agents walked into a police station the next morning and removed the officer who had cuffed him in front of his children. The porch is quiet again now. The same light still comes on at dusk, and the children still run out when they see their father step from the truck. If this story moved you, hit the like button and subscribe. We tell the ones that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Drop a comment and tell us what you would have done on that porch. We will see you in the next one.